All right. Good morning, everyone. Merry Christmas Eve here. We've got a jam-packed schedule, honestly, even though it's a little bit small here on the best of 2023 highlights. So there's a lot of events that happened throughout the year, and I want to highlight what I thought was probably most significant and most important, and then also what's being set up for 2024 and beyond, I guess, beyond 2024 as well, but mostly in the beginning of the year, at least from what we can project. So that would be the agenda today here. We'll give a few seconds for people to join in. Oh, good morning, Adam. I am trying to keep track of the chat here. Thank you. And for those who are also joining here, Adam's also great, a great resource here on Palantir, especially on the option side too. So he gives a really good method there if you guys are interested in the wheel method. I believe it's the wheel method with selling calls as well as selling puts there. So, but yes, thank you all for joining. Oh, hey Midwest as well. Cool. But yeah, I could just get right into it here. I know whoever just joins the stream, we can just circle on back. But essentially, we're not going to cover the news that I did this week immediately. Maybe just some bits here. But if you are interested in that and get the quick lowdown, just go to the weekly video released on Saturday, as per usual. Now, let's just get started. Cool. So just for everyone to see what 2023 was like, right? So if you've been around, at least for Palantir side, or maybe just watched the stock, even if you didn't own it, we were kind of in that 2022 phase at the beginning of 2023 as well, right? In the single digits most of the time. We had a few catalysts earlier in the year. I believe this is the first quarter earnings there, and that's, of course, one of the big catalysts that happened. I think at least people getting to notice Palantir, and I'll talk about why exactly. But throughout the year, right, now we've been riding this wave into the teens, hitting into the low 20s there, and haven't seen levels that, let me see if we just took a zoom back here. Yeah, since early 2022. So in that downward direction, though. So we'll see how 2024 sounds out. But this is just like a quick overview of what the year was like, especially if you were a shareholder throughout. So thank you all for joining. I'm seeing a bunch of you starting to hop in. And since it's Christmas Eve, let me know if you've started celebrating. I just had my father-in-law's side yesterday, and then I'll have my mother-in-law's for today on Christmas Eve, and then Christmas for my side here. So let me know if you celebrate it, and if you don't, that's cool too. I mean, if you celebrate something else, or you could celebrate with me right here today, right, for the Christmas Eve kind of special early in the morning. So we just took a zoom out here of Palantir throughout 2023, price-wise at least. And just something interesting to point out is that volume here, right? I mean, with any big moves, you're going to see larger volume. But with that large volume here coming in, you could even suspect that's when institutions were also coming back in or going into Palantir. So, but let's just take a review of 2023 here. And I'm going to flash that agenda really quick. Looks short, but we got a lot of tabs to go through since we had a busy year, and I think pivotal year as well, if you take a look at the title to click on it here. So great. So the first thing I think was probably the game changer, and at least starting the possibilities of what changed the thoughts of people on Palantir, was that first quarter of GAAP profitability. Now, keep note, this was announced on February 13 of 2023, and this is for Q4 2022. So that's results as of the end of December here. Of course, there's that delay getting everything all set up here. But I think this was the one that started it all, honestly, for February of 2023. And this is before a lot of the major events that we might think and take for granted now that, oh, this has always been in the plan for Palantir. But you'll see, right, this is before AIP, S&P inclusion, all those things. So it's really interesting. Now, the caveat here, if you guys remember, the first quarter of GAAP profitability that they achieved, so it was 1 cent, that's fine. But they did do a reevaluation of their Japanese asset there, so a stepped up basis. So a lot of people still thought, oh, okay, it's not necessarily the best thing because they had to rely on financial engineering. So if you just remember back then, that was kind of the big news there. And the other thing that people pointed out for these was still revenue, right? We're still trying to see how revenue is going to grow quarter over quarter. And of course, if you look at a full year basis, it's still okay, but this is when we were still decelerating. So we weren't growing as fast. So the biggest highlight, honestly, was the GAAP income here, but everyone wanted to say, oh, it's not necessarily true because of the step up basis. So keep that in mind, right, for the whole narrative of 2023 and those major points that started to flip this around here. Now, the next thing that I thought was significant. So a couple months later here, we have Alex Karp coming out with a letter, our new platform. So this is already on the cusp of, let's say, ChatGPT. I think that came out late 2022. So the regular public, the commercial side of things, just having a chat bot, I guess you could say that's what people thought of it like as artificial intelligence. And then Palantir comes out here and honestly, probably one of the first major companies to have a solution out here and then making it. I mean, if you think about it, this was set up kind of based on all the work that Palantir has done over the decades. So their belief in actually having a useful and valuable artificial intelligence platform is based off, in my opinion, the ontology, right? And this is not new news. We know that people have always sought after good data and then using that data well and having clean data, of course, with any of your processes. There's raw data, but then there's processes, transformations, and such. But then in order to have an artificial intelligence kind of platform or I guess solution built out, it still relies on that fuel there. So if you put in the wrong fuel into your car, it's not going to run as well and even damage it. Or in this case, it would do hallucinations or just give you bad answers or just not do well. So this was the letter here. It came out. Now, it doesn't necessarily have all the fun facts of, and at the time of April, we don't necessarily know how this will manifest, how they're going to sell the platform, who's using it. But we had AIP cons coming up as well, showcasing at least those early use cases here. And it was only the big thing that people took away from the announcement of AIP was that, oh, these customers seem to be building out AI solutions within weeks, or at least early 1 month, maybe 1 or 2 months. So that AIP con, that first one that came out there, that was the one that actually showcased at least the early signs of the power and scalability and the quickness possible to get customers on board here. But remember, those customers were previous customers, so they had ontology set up, and I think that was the biggest kind of hurdle for a lot of folks here. But you'll see, obviously, later in the year that they've overcome this or seem to have done so. Now, the next big event of 2023 is S&P inclusion, the rules around that. So basically, Palantir would have eventually met all the criteria except the F-class share here. And this is, of course, applicable to many other companies. So essentially, you just want to think of it like this. If founders have control regardless of their actual ownership because of the voting differential, right? If you have F-class shares that have 10-1 versus like, even though there's more shares of regular common class A or B shares that have less voting power, or sorry, common class A has less voting power 1-1, then that can be an issue if you think about it from an institutional standpoint. If you're buying these A shares, like, how come I'm not going to have as much say here? But as we've seen throughout early 2000s, I think it was Facebook who popularized it much more. But essentially keeping that founder control, showing the possibilities of, oh my God, these large market caps coming out because we let the founder cook. You know what I mean? And not every year, every quarter over quarter is going to be perfect, but sometimes we lose sight of that, especially as public shareholders and a big conglomerate of humans, and taking into account the macro events happening all around. So I think this was a very significant moment too. Like I said, like it hasn't happened yet, but we know from at this point in time, Palantir just had their first quarter of GAAP profitability. Now, people want to argue that, of course, with the stepped up basis, but that means even if they don't hit it next time, in the future, eventually, they will be eligible for this. And on the marketing standpoint, saying you're part of the S&P 500 is a big thing. So it gives you more reputation. Certain customers might not even want to deal with you if you don't have certain criteria. And of course, everyone knows that if you're going to be part of an index, your shares need to be bought up at least or held to maintain that. So any institution that's going to have a product like an index fund, they would need some exposure to Palantir in that case. So that was honestly really big, at least in the financial and the stock market side of Palantir, even though we've talked about the business end of the new platform. Sorry, excuse me if you heard my wife in the background, but a sneeze there. But next thing after the S&P, we have the second consecutive quarter of GAAP profitability. Now, I'm not going to go through every single quarter of GAAP profitability just because it's GAAP profitable. The big reason I wanted to bring this up, so we have the first quarter of 2023. We have that uncertainty around what's happening with AIP, what's happening with the stepped-up basis for Japan. You can't just keep on doing something like that. Now, we saw they had a GAAP income, so positive GAAP income from operations. And this was nice because this shows that they can actually make money regardless at a GAAP level, and showing that they can do this, right, operationally. And I believe they have right here. So if you bring up the highlight, obviously it's just a 1% margin here, but this was probably the biggest highlight for myself, showing that they're able to scale their income on a gap basis here. So that was kind of the big thing. But if you do go look at the revenue, yeah, at this point, people were still kind of, oh, what's happening here? Year over year, 18%. So now we're sub 20%. So it was kind of a mix what happened at this point in time. So if we just go to the chart, honestly, people were excited about this. In my head, I was like, okay, this is good. They showed 2 consecutive gap quarters. So that's halfway through the S&P eligibility. Now, it doesn't mean that it's the end all be all just because you're in the S&P that you're amazing forever, but it's still a significant sign here, and the market liked this information. What I liked the most was that gap profitability, honestly, with that operational side, without the step-up basis. Now, revenue growth, I think that's where a lot of the hesitation still came, but if you look at it, this is honestly where it all started, and it took a few days here, but essentially, yeah, after those earnings were released there, the second quarter of consecutive. Now, we're already halfway through the year almost. Now, the war in Ukraine has been going on since 2022. A lot of things happened. Essentially, Palantir was one of the first to come over, show the U.S. at least, representing kind of commercially the United States, and being at their side and ready to help them out. And we wanted to know, at least on the business side and as investors, what is kind of coming out of this. And I understand the mission, defending Western values, adversarial countries that are against the interests of the United States, even though Ukraine is technically not a NATO country, but they're kind of the gateway into NATO if you think about it. So a proxy war here. But still, business-wise, we were wondering, what is this going to come about for investors? And the important thing to note was that everyone thought, in probably this was obvious, but looking back, it's so much more obvious that if you're there for them right at the very beginning, at the end of every war, regardless of the outcome, as long as your state still exists in some form, even if you have lost territory or something of that nature, and we'll see how this actually fully plays out in the end, but there's reconstruction that needs to happen, especially on the infrastructure side. If you think about World War II, that's what happened, right? The United States, they could have, let's say, taken over the world. If you think about it, after the end of the war, everyone was beaten down, even though the West technically won, or the Allies won. Britain was not in good shape, as well as France, after Nazi occupation. And this is kind of that game here on a micro scale, where, and I don't want to call it a game because it's literally people's lives, but essentially that's what it was. The United States helped fund and build up the world. They were unaffected, at least on their domestic land here, maybe minimally, besides Pearl Harbor, of course, being the biggest, but a lot of smaller things and interactions. But essentially, we were left intact. And our kind of duty, I guess, we felt for the world is to help rebuild it. And there's, of course, financial benefits to that and political ones that happen. But in the end, this is what a lot of shareholders were looking out for Ukraine. And we'll see how this actually plays over time. We've got murmurs of it, AIP being used for the demining operations. I put in the last video that Sam Shankar, he put a tweet out there just saying up close, like the value that they're bringing, but we also saw that demo. So there's a lot of things still at play for Ukraine. And then also the other big contract, I would say, because we haven't really heard or, I guess confirmed any newer big U.S. contracts here, especially on the military side. So throughout the year, there were just a lot of deals that we were wondering about. And will Palantir maintain its government revenue, especially on the military side? And we know that maybe internationally it's not the hottest, and this has been a common theme throughout 2023. And we know that Palantir has some form of base, the lumpiness that Alex Karp has brought up here, but getting the U.S. SOCOM, I think seeing that big number of 463 million, I think on the day this was announced, it didn't have a big reaction. So this was on June 5th. Let's see, June 5th here. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it is kind of a big candle, but unless it was after hours that it was said. But essentially, it's kind of same old business for Palantir investors. Oh my gosh, this is an amazing news. Like, it's a big contract. How come we didn't move? Well, it doesn't matter, I guess, per se. And if you've seen my other videos on how these contracts are paid out, you'll know that, of course, if it's a multi-year contract, it's not all up front at once. And there's requirements and goals that you have to hit to get paid out. So, but I think at least on a dollar basis and showing that it's in the sector of U.S. government and the military side, it was nice to see that Palantir still lives up to this. And this is halfway through the year. Now, talking about Ukraine again, but probably a little bit briefly here, this is more symbolic. Palantir does its first kind of sponsorship. And if you think about Palantir as a company and you see how you don't want to be seen as a secret company if you're trying to break into the commercial world. I could see why when you started back in the decades developing your product, right? If you're still cooking, right, you don't necessarily want to shout out from the rooftops, oh my gosh, we're like this amazing, when you think yourself need to improve. And I think it was great that they did this partnership here. It made sense, right? First, politically, it shouldn't be controversial at all, right? They're going to Ukraine. This is more on the people side, right? You go for a international tennis star. So for partnering with Alina Svitolina, this was kind of the little snowball that started them becoming more and more publicly out there, especially when it comes to certain issues. And we all saw this, of course, with Israel Hamas, just as was more recently. But I wouldn't be surprised to see over time, at least internationally, I think maybe in the United States, they might not do these kind of partnerships here, but I could see it. And I think it's also to help with brand recognition, because if Palantir is going to help with the reconstruction side, that is going to probably seep into commercial aspects, at least if they do help with infrastructure, and they help on the government side of putting up their analytics and I guess tying things together and managing that. It's going to spill into the commercial side, and some name recognition is going to help there. And, you never know if some random CEO or analyst sees a Palantir and they're like, what is that? I'm looking at this tennis game? And then they, that could be the start of it too. So you never really know with these small things. So that was kind of a very interesting action that they did in the middle of the year that a lot of people probably necessarily weren't expecting, but I think it's still significant and very symbolic. And we'll see how this actually plays out for them in the end and if they continue to do more similar things. Now, I feel like I've been talking for long. We're basically halfway through the year here. This was in late June, and this is where we get to more juicier stuff here. But let me just see the agenda really quick for those who haven't seen in the middle. We're just going through all the highlights of 2023. That at least I think. So it's not every single thing. I know some people can argue for this was way better or whatever. And a lot of things happen. So of course, there's not everything is going to be said, but also how that sets us up for 2024. And it looks like we got a few more people in the chat. Thank you all for joining. Yeah, if you guys want to know, there's a celebrity in the chat. We got Adam. He was the first one. Thank you. But we got everyone. Merry Christmas to you all. And if you don't celebrate Christmas, happy holidays or whatever you celebrate. Thankful for you all to be joining here on a Christmas Eve. And I'm kind of going to a retrospective kind of episode here, looking back through 2023. And, next week is going to be the end of the year, right? New Year's Eve. So we'll see how that live stream is. I'm assuming that Palantir is not going to be releasing too many press releases in between the Tuesday, and I believe the market will be open on Friday as well, of this coming week here. So, but thank you all for joining. Yeah, I love being in this holiday time frame. At least for work wise, it's flexible for me. It's quieter in the office and a good time to hang around a bit, knowing that other people are doing the same. So not saying to slack off anyone, just so you know. But yeah, let's continue on. Just that little quick mid-year break for 2023. So this is where I think it gets very interesting. So Palantir customers to feature artificial intelligence platform. So we already had our first AIP Con, and the second one, we're still trying to figure out what's Palantir doing through the different earnings. We're trying to see, is this scaling? Is this increasing customer counts? And we weren't necessarily seeing that. And we still had confidence. I would say I still had confidence in management. I mean, with rolling out a new platform and you're going to try to use this as the glue that sticks all your other products together, I would say, or be the door opener to many potential customers and current customers, then I don't mind giving it some time, or even half a year, or even more than a half a year, honestly, even a year to scale that. But honestly, I think Palantir has exceeded my expectations. But for this specific AIP Con, it was very important because what we got to see and hear about were the murmurings of Palantir AIP boot camps. Now, when I saw 0 to 5 use cases the first time, I was like, is that right? There's probably some prep work, right? They need to probably load some data in, and maybe it takes a couple weeks there just to make sure. And then you can do the boot camp. And then maybe that's still the case, but either way, they're still advertising 0 to use case in 5 days. And this is important. It's not it's not just saying, oh, we're going to take you to 0 to an idea in 5 days or how to use it in 5 days. They say use case, and that means something applicable and realistic for your organization. And I'm assuming if you say use case, it means there's some level of value there. So when he first announced it, and I'll play the clip too, just so we have an idea of what it was like back then in September. And it's not even that long ago. That's 3 months ago. But we've seen what a lot of these murmurings about getting clients on board in this manner and how useful it's been and how fast it's been. And I mean, management's been talking it up. We still need to see the numbers come through. I mean, I think the last quarters for customer numbers, it didn't necessarily have a huge spike. However, it's maintaining its growth rate at least. And if the base is growing and you're maintaining a growth rate, you're technically growing a little bit faster there. But let's just look at Ted Mabry here giving that little speech here and talking about the AI boot camps. So just let me know if anything is wrong with the desktop audio once I play it.
And so what all of these learnings have sort of led us to realize is that AIP requires a fundamentally different go-to-market. And probably more importantly for you all, I think it requires a fundamentally different adoption curve. The value of getting started is so important, and you will move so much more quickly if we can reduce the friction to allow you to get started. And so our primary means of going to market with AIP will be through these boot camps. They will be efficient, they will be respectful of your time, critically. And then in these boot camps, what you can expect to do is to get your hands on the keyboard, iterating, getting that keyboard time, building your intuition about how to apply AI in your operating context, and critically accelerating past that idea of chat. You know, it's like we'll say this over and over again, but we will help you get past chat very quickly. We'll help you decomp a business process. Where are you likely to provide significant AI leverage immediately? Where is there unstructured data feeding into a structured business process? Where is your business process actually happen much more outside of your core systems than your core systems might think? Like building these sort of easy ways so we can help you fish then and deploy across these other different boot camps. And we're seeing this sort of with great effect where people that have gone through the boot camps are then coming back with 4 or 5 use cases 2 weeks later because they've learned how to fish in doing that. And then also have a real live initial implementation of a use case and a plan to figure out how to take that MVP and get it into production.
Yeah, so when they brought it up here, I was kind of blown away. First of all, the first thing I saw was 0 to use case in 5 days. Now, Ted Mabry says a couple things here that are important. So the coming back aspect, right? Repeat customers. So this is kind of the snowball effect, at least in someone's brain. If I can apply AIP here in this process, what does this mean for all these other things, right? And honestly, the first thing you think of is like, what do I hate about work? And then what processes, like what do I want to automate, right? But it might have some human aspect to it and some flexibility that you can't necessarily just make a macro for, right? If you think about Excel, where it's like kind of brain dead, like copy and pasting. However, this is kind of that next step of what an AIP can do. And of course, you get that hand holding in a boot camp. And that's what's expected, especially as a customer learning about it. And then the other thing that he brought up, for some reason I'm losing tech in my brain here, but essentially the other thing that he brought up was, oh my gosh, why am I losing track? Give me a second here. Well, actually, there's another thing I wanted to talk about in the chat here. So James just brought up a cool thing that I wish would be a great Christmas gift, at least for upcoming earnings. If we can see the closing ratios on AIP and then average contract amount for these boot camps. So from what we've always thought about Palantir is, well, especially when it was Foundry and we were just thinking about customers onboarding to that longer process. Oh, it's like a pilot period here, so they're not going to get paid a lot. It's just enough to count them as a customer. How does that scale over time, and what does that look like for AIP? Now, the realistic part of this, I don't think we're going to get that minute of a breakdown on revenue. And we'd probably see it on other platforms before we even see it for AIP, but that would be amazing. And then the closing on ratios, right? So if they're touting this go-to-market strategy as, oh, this is amazing, this has transformed our organization, and from what we've seen, at least in those undisclosed numbers I covered this week, as well as in the weekly video yesterday, if they're at 414 boot camps versus 325 that they were expecting at the end of the year, that means something is working, at least in getting, it's like a thumbnail, right? And the title for a YouTube video, they're getting the click. They're getting the person in the door. Now, are they actually keeping them watching? Are they actually keeping them using the platform? Do did they give them something so valuable, or at least valuable for the effort that they put in, that they want to continue the relationship and officially sign on? And then I'm assuming the upsell in the process would be, well, if you're on the ontology, you have an ontologies all set up here, the power of this AI use case will be much more important, more accurate, right? And even if you use other models here, that's going to supercharge it. And then from there, of course, if you have other data and tying in, maybe they only have a limited data source that they're also using for that specific use case for the AIP bootcamp, maybe that's also part of the upsell here too. If you're going to tie more data, more business operations throughout, right? So say that you're only using it specifically in, I don't know, something low stakes like in HR or accounting. I guess accounting is not low stakes if you care about your numbers, but something where you feel like it's not going to change the way that your business operates too much because you don't know how that's going to shock you. And honestly, that's a big thing for large and more established organizations. You have something that's working. So yeah, I understand innovation is great and it can supercharge, but there's a risk involved in transitioning your technology over, right? Is there going to be disruptions to your current needs there, or is there going to be something down the line that maybe you didn't think about and something didn't work out contractually that you were supposed to fulfill, and that the platform wasn't set up that way, the new platform at least. So there's a lot of things to take into account here when it comes into a large enterprise signing up. It's not as easy as, oh, we went to the boot camp, we love it, let's sign on, right? So great comment there, James. Thank you for bringing that up. If only that was going to happen. We'll see. Maybe I'll be surprised, but I don't think we'll get that much insight, at least officially, and put onto the paper and subject to scrutiny by the public, specifically on AIP numbers. Now, maybe at like an AIP con or a earnings call, management might talk about more about the successes and say like a rough kind of thing, like over half of our customers that are over half of the people who went to boot camp, right? Something like that. And that's all speculation, but they probably, I'm not in one to expect very specifics there. And for some reason, I'm blanking on the first thing that he said, but let me just replay this really quick.
And so what all of these learnings have sort of led us to realize is that AIP requires a fundamentally different go-to-market. And probably more importantly for you all, I think it requires a fundamentally different adoption curve. The value of getting started is so important, and you will move so much more quickly if we can reduce the friction to allow you to get started. And so
yeah, I think that was the first thought I lost track of. It was kind of related to the rant I did into the comment there, but it's that reduction of friction. That's one of the biggest aspects for a large sale. If you can take out, even though it may seem insignificant on an individual transaction, it really compounds, especially when you have to deal with the sales team, you're dealing with C-suite, especially something like a Palantir. You always think of those interactions with a C-suite involved, and getting those kind of those approvals needed for something that can be transformative for your organization and I guess disruptive as well. So the other parts here that come up. So yes, now we had the huge announcement. Palantir has an AIP bootcamp now. We know about AIP. We know about the possibility of S&P 500. A lot of different deals throughout, and the kind of big statements made by their partnerships and stuff that comes out for Ukraine and internationally. Now we get to its fourth consecutive quarter of GAAP profitability. This happened so 2023, the books actually aren't done yet, right, for Q4. So we're still technically up till December 31st. But we've achieved the 4 consecutive quarters of GAAP profitability back in November, since that's for results up to the end of third quarter. So yeah, this was a big monumental moment. Now that we know that for sure, now they're going to meet all the criteria of the S&P inclusion. Now, I don't think anyone was expecting them to get included immediately, right? And then we have all these things in regards to other people who are other companies that could be candidates to be added into the S&P. So it's just something to be wary of here. I think a lot of folks were also saying, oh, 2024 makes more sense. So I don't think it's controversial to say that at all. But honestly, the biggest part of this earnings was that fourth quarter of GAAP profitability. And I think a lot of people might miss this. And I think it wasn't like the hugest thing in the world, but revenue, when we grew it was kind of I'm not saying that we've officially did a U-turn, right? And we still have to see how this plays out. But for the latest figures to come out financially, this was nice to see. Okay, we're not dropping so much more here for the quarter over quarter. And we just wanted to see that at least, stop the bleeding a bit. And now we want to see that trajectory go up, hopefully go above 20%. I don't know immediately, honestly, for Q4 of 2023. Technically, it's still not done, so maybe something can be pulled out of a hat. But 2024, I'm hoping, and if this is a U-turn for this of Q3 earnings, that we start to see faster growth again for the top line. And that's honestly, so just getting GAAP earnings is enough for me. I don't care about them maximizing this per se. And we know balance sheet wise, Palantir has been stellar throughout the year. Lots of cash, minimal debt, just money in treasuries, getting interest where they can, not necessarily being too crazy with it, right? And being conservative at some point, I think is fine. Now will be interesting, and I'll bring this up also as a catalyst, but we'll see how the Fed, if they actually cut those rates in 2024, that's going to change the equation for a lot of companies, and especially Palantir, when it comes to that risk of, do we want to hold money in these guaranteed return assets, or do we want to start doing something with this cash, and what do we do? And is it even going to be worth doing that? And I think that's something we have not experienced as Palantir shareholders, unless you think of SPACs. I'll just say that there. But, reinvestment into certain parts of maybe research and development, but maybe it's not. It might have returning a decent ROI on that. However, we haven't seen necessarily a reacceleration of that, or maybe there's not a need for it. That's the thing. They could just become more efficient at product development. So, fourth quarter, GAAP profitability. I'm sure I had a whole video on that if you want all the details and going through the presentation there. Now, this was building up throughout the year, and I'd say years as well. So I think for before the end of the year, this is great to have. And obviously expectations are like, end of September, we're going to know who wins the contract for the NHS FDP platform. So this was huge news in regards to finally putting the nail in the coffin, getting something official on the books, awarding of the contract here, and Palantir did it. Now, just remember there were a few caveats here, and obviously things can change in the process for the contracting, the procurement process, maybe the terms of the contract, because not every single thing is going to come out until once it's signed here, especially when it comes to government contracts. So what we saw and what we were kind of expecting was, I believe it was the 480 million. Now it's already lost me. It doesn't matter. It's kind of irrelevant at this point now. But basically, a lot of investors might have been mixing up 5 years, 7 years, the additional years. But either way, the amount of sharing was disclosed, or not disclosed. It wasn't the amount, but the sharing of the contract was disclosed that's a high possibility earlier in the year. And that's what happened, of course, but also the dollar amount and the terms, it was a little bit smaller than we expected, which was fine. I think symbolically, this is still a good win, but the course of 7 years here, more trust to join, of course. NHS England was the biggest proponent of this and doing pilots at their trust. And then it says up to $330 million investment in the FDP platform and associated services. Now, remember, this is not only to Palantir. There's other partners here, and I didn't highlight it, but you guys can see it there. Palantir with support from Accenture, PwC, NECS, and Carnel Ferrar. So Palantir will probably be the technology aspect of this, the implementation support. I'm assuming training, documentation, a lot of those things for the consultants to do. So they're sharing this, and honestly, we'll see if there's a significant bump in maybe UK revenue over time, or at least some stabilization in it because of this, because at least this is a longer-term contract, and even if it's not the biggest balloon in the world, it'll bring some form of revenue that we can expect there. So I think the biggest thing was finally getting this out of the way. It took most of the year after a couple delays, thinking end of September, maybe mid-October, and then it took basically the end of November. So I was following that a lot, and I know there was, on Twitter at least, if you were watching, there was a lot of funny things that can go into account there, like Foxglove is a big one. And of course, we have that more recent stuff still trying to fight this fight against Palantir. I did cover that in my previous video, but it's kind of a muddied up mess, honestly, and it's supposed to be that way based on the campaigns of those against the FDP contract. And it's just silly too, because they're kind of mixing in a few issues, and they're not all the same organizations, just so you know. So if you're scrolling on Twitter and you just say you look up Palantir, you're going to see a lot of interesting statements being made about Palantir and, oh, they're going to steal your data, when in reality they have no idea what Palantir does. And it honestly doesn't make sense for the business model and motivations, even though I have to keep repeating that. That's honestly like the what the heck moment where it's like, don't you understand? It doesn't make sense. They're not like, you're on social media. Do you understand what social media does? They literally monetize the user. So, all right. And then after that, so the only reason why I bring up this contract, I know it's so recent and I feel like I talked to it to death a couple weeks ago, the Vantage contract. So this was a large contract that was 2019, 400, I think it's 468 million, but essentially big contract. I think I'm mixing up with the other contract there, but essentially we were kind of what's going to happen here, right? And who brought this attention was Louis De Palma from William Blair. So I think this kind of showcase, and I'm not going to go through every single thing that happened because of it, but basically William Blair's Louis De Palma said, oh, I attended this thing and it sounds like Palantir is probably going to either lose out some money on the contract or something. The U.S. Army's worried about the IP licensing here. And then the first time I read that, I thought, oh, this is interesting because this would be groundbreaking and game changing in a bad way for Palantir, because that's kind of the whole reputation that they rely on, especially for the U.S. government business and especially on the military side. So it was just funny that it prompted a response officially from the Army to clear up their statements here, and they're happy with the stuff that they have. And then Shyam Sankar, of course, quoting that and literally saying that the dude was wrong. And then obviously then a few days later we get the 1-year extension. So yes, I get it. It's not and then after that, Louis De Palma says, oh, no, but it's not a 4-year contract for the same amount again. See, it's a reduction, right? Because it's only 1 year of the same amount. So it's just funny that we got to this point here. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I guess so. You're right, technically, in that case, but maybe let us know that in the future. That's exactly what you want. You just want a redo of the contract. So, but either way, I think symbolically, this is great. This shows Palantir, at least in the military side, we get another year. It's another big contract, and it sets up for what's going to happen in 2024, because a lot of these programs are going to be tying together JADC2 Titan. So for those joining, so this just happened on December 15th, but for those who just joined, I was just talking about the best of 2023 highlights, and it kind of sets us up here for a 2024 catalyst. Now, keep in mind, this is focused kind of, I'd say, earlier in the year. One of them is more macro, of course, and I think I alluded to that with Jerome Powell and the Fed and all that stuff. But yeah, this is a really interesting time for Palantir, and I think 2023 was a monumental year because of all the things that I did. So if you've just joined, yeah, feel free to scroll back. A lot of things, right? AIP coming out, AIP boot camps as well. We have the S&P inclusion and the thoughts of Alex Karp on that. We had the first GAAP profitability that was disclosed, even though it's back from Q4 2022. That was disclosed in February. But then we got that, we continued to perform, even though people were like, oh, it's just GAAP profitable because of the step-up basis that first time. No, we got it for the next quarter, and then, of course, the fourth quarter in Q3 of 2023. So 4 consecutive quarters of GAAP profitability, meaning the last 4, if you add them up together, is a positive GAAP net income, which is amazing, I would say, at this point. Although it's not what me as an official and I guess as an investor for growth stocks care about all the time. But if you might as well, right? It gives you, it spokes up your reputation, as well as now the S&P inclusion. So it's huge there. And just before talking about 2024, let's just take a look at the chat. Thank you all for joining here. I know I kind of just talk on and on, right? But 2023 was a very busy year and a lot of things to cover. Now, let's just go over briefly on those catalysts that I was talking about. So transitioning from this Vantage program, we have the Army still. So we have the Titan program. This information actually came out not too long ago as well, that we get some early December, we find out that, okay, the Army's not going to give out their contract here or show the winner of the Titan project at the end of the year, which I think was the original expectations. Now, for context, Palantir has been competing against RTX or Raytheon, and this is like, it's not just Palantir by themselves. So if they're going to be doing a targeting system here, or tying nodes together for this information, so it's going to tie together the land, sea, air, all the space as well, and then bring those all together for this system. Now, there was a contract won back in 2022 to officially do the trial, because it had to whittle down who was worthy, right, or who was actually a real contender in this case. So it came down to Palantir and RTX. And yeah, we'll see how this turns out. I think this will be important because it's, like I said, it's related to the other projects that the Army is doing, and the possibility of this spilling over, maybe already being tested out internationally or in some form. Not saying for sure, but I think there's been murmurings and some clues about that, especially in Ukraine as well as Israel versus Hamas. So something to look out for, and it's within the beginning part of the year. So that could mean, I'd say before the half of the year is done. So it doesn't mean it's going to happen right when it's January 1. But I think a lot of people have been waiting for this because this pilot program has been going on for a while. And hopefully we want Palantir to win this. So Amir actually put up a great post here if you go onto X. So give him a follow if you haven't. He brings up a lot of these great things, but I think the figure that a lot of people are interested in is like, okay, well, how big is this? How significant is this? Now, remember, this is still in tandem with other partners and people that they're working with, but the possibility of 1.5 billion over 5 years, so 300 million per year, split that up with a few partners, right? That could be, over 100 million at least per year, I would assume. It might depend on how much work you're doing or contributing, but it's still something that is significant. And even if it's not going to be the supercharger growth that everyone's expecting, it's a nice little add-on there for stability to revenue. So yeah, this is a great little excerpt here if you want to get caught up on what Titan program is. So it's always a long acronym. I always forget. Tactical Intelligence Targeting Access Node. So it's part of the overall modernization efforts too, like I've mentioned. So there's that JADC2, Joint All-Domain Command and Control, and then also the Vantage platform there. And Vantage too, just quick note, it's also going to help bring on other, not necessarily competitors, but other vendors as well to the Army and help be that glue that sticks it together. So there's a lot of things at play here, and there's a lot of acronyms at play. So once they get awarded out, at least something, I'm just assuming if they were to be awarded this, there would probably be an official PR release from Palantir themselves, just like they did for that extension for the Vantage program. So that will be nice to see if we can get that earlier in the year. Now, the second thing that a lot of people are looking forward to, so we know that Palantir has not been added to the S&P yet, as of the 2023. So just remember here when the S&P rebalances, what happens in this case, and companies go in and out. This doesn't happen every single day, right? And that would be impractical. However, just keep an eye out here on these quarterly times here. I didn't know the exact days, honestly, but it's like after the close of the third Friday in March, June, September, and December. So there's a lot of things at play here, but essentially there's still some time, but it's something to look out for. And once it's officially there, I'm assuming that there's a lot of institutions already buying in expectations. And even if it's not necessarily because they have to reach it for their S&P 500, Palantir already has reached their full year of GAAP profitability. That's a metric for a lot of investors, analysts. It might even just be the filter there. You're not going to even look at a company until it has some GAAP profitability. Albeit if you're more conservative, looking at like a PE ratio, yeah, it's going to look crazy no matter what. But at least you're able to look at it now since they've reached that GAAP profitability. And some of them might just be the latest quarter of GAAP profitability, but having 4 in a row, that makes a difference here at who's going to look at it. And even for individual retail investors, there's some folks, and understandably so, if you're in a certain place in life, you have to be a little bit more conservative. So you could be conservative in the companies that you choose to, but you can also be conservative as well in the allocation to it. So you're open to some risk. But for some people, they just don't look at companies until it reaches a level of profitability. Some people don't even look if you don't offer a dividend, right? So everyone has their own personal level of safety that they believe in. So this slowly opens the doors to institutional investors as well as individual retail investors. So that's another nice point to put there. And for the S&P, yeah, I think people are just interested in how companies change over time here. So I forgot why I put this article up here, actually. But it's more to come to see what actually happens and who's going to be swapped out to think about it. So if someone is going into the S&P, someone has to come out there. Obviously, it's the 500 for a reason. And oh, no, I remember why I put this. Yeah, it's just showing the scale of how this changes. So typically the S&P makes roughly 20 changes in a year to the companies. So it's just something to be aware of. And Palantir, honestly, they're a top company in the United States. So even though this sounds like a small amount of companies, they've met the criterion Of course, there's other companies that have as well. And there's companies who will not meet it that are sitting in the index right now. And there's a lot of time to come still in between. Was that a quarter? Yeah, essentially 3 months to see how this plays out. And then the last kind of catalyst, I would say, for the whole year. So this is more on the macro scale. So when Jerome Powell spoke at keeping rates steady or pausing rates, so this is just recently, middle of December, I was like, okay, that's kind of expected. But then indicating, so yeah, people were talking about rate cuts, but the Fed themselves talking about, oh, cuts coming in 2024. I think that really flipped the switch for a lot of people on the narrative on inflation. So I guess what helped is the inflation numbers aren't crazy now, right? But essentially, they're still seeing in different areas of, I think energy is the one that's really down. And I've been seeing this at the gas station too. So I don't have a car, but I do borrow it during the holidays. And I've noticed the gas is much lower. I'm seeing some twos there on the signs, which is interesting, at least for my area. High twos, of course, but I have to get the premium gas for the car that I use. So it's a deceptive that I'm paying $4 per gallon there, but I'm seeing $3 for the normal gas. But yeah, just seeing different aspects of the economy that are still kind of holding steady. And I think the one that I'm looking out for the most is housing, right? And this is anecdotal too. So my personal experience, even talking about gas, but also looking at houses on Zillow, right? I've seen a lot more, at least in the Chicago area, and it's going to vary too between neighborhoods, honestly, the way that at least how it works here in the real estate market. But yeah, I've been seeing prices going down for some, kind of big decreases, especially for multi-bedrooms, which was interesting because I was looking primarily at, 2-something-ish bedrooms, maybe 2 baths, and then seeing the amount of properties opening up because I didn't look for a few months. And then, yeah, I think we'll see some changes in housing, honestly, and that could be a huge indicator for the Fed on what they're going to do. Now, if they become more dovish than expected, that would be really interesting. So if they indicate later on, like, oh my gosh, we're going to need to cut rates even more, that would make the market go crazy. And for a company like Palantir, that's a growth stock, right? We know how interest rates affect them. It can be a big catalyst not only for them, but the overall markets in general and the need for capital to go somewhere that they can get a higher rate of return. Albeit, historically, going through the 2010s and after the Great Recession, seeing these kind of interest rates at a bank account, right? I've seen over a 1% is crazy already, but 3-4%, I think it still will take some time for people to take that cash out. But seeing that downward trajectory, though, is definitely a big change for the overall market. So 2023 was very, very busy for Palantir. 2024 looks like it's going to be busy. And honestly, these were just kind of small catalysts I want to think about. Honestly, there's going to be probably a lot more. And I think what a lot of people are looking out for in 2024 is how did Palantir do for Q4 of 2023? Did AIP bootcamps make a difference? Are we going to see an actual change in customer numbers? If you want to remember, customer numbers rely on actually getting revenue and being recognized there within the last rolling 12 months. So just because you've done a pilot with AIP bootcamps, you're not a customer there, or at least not in the presentation that they put, unless they do a small change there. So that's what I'm looking out for. And I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you all for joining on Christmas Eve. Tomorrow for Christmas Day, I'm not sure if there'll be a video, honestly. The market's closed. I think you guys should all enjoy the time there with family, friends, yourselves. Eat good, right? I ate very good yesterday, and I'm going to eat good today as well as tomorrow. So hopefully I don't knock myself out and unable to provide those Palantir daily videos there. But please take the time to enjoy, and thank you all. I'm extremely grateful. This has been a great year for 2023. So I'll end the stream here and have a good rest of your days and good rest of your holiday week and close out 2023 into 2024 on a positive note. And I hope Palantir does the same as well. Thank you.